welcome back to She Means Business. Thank you for joining us. This week's episode is on Allyship in Action. We have Mark Jenkins, who's the CEO and director of The Gap, and then we have our very own Daniel Lawrence, who has joined us, who's the CEO of Bots for That. Do you guys sort of want to introduce yourselves and let the audience know who you are and how we sort of started this all together?
After you, Mark. Guest first.
I was just going to say the same to you, but so welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Mark Jenkins. You've probably gathered I'm from the Southern Hemisphere. I'm from New Zealand, where it's a cold winter's night. I guess I look after The Gap, which is an organisation that helps accountants to work in the space of advisory by running better meetings with their clients, that sort of thing. I've been a chartered accountant for about 30 years and owned a firm for nearly 20 years and have been employing people for about 30 years. So that's probably enough about me. Over to you, Daniel.
How do I follow that? Christ, I know actually. We've been doing what we do for it feels like forever in the space of accounting and automation. Really, in reality, it's the last few years that have really started to make a difference for us and for Christian and I as the founders. Since we started to really build and scale the business up and have these wonderful people like Christina, Amy, and Sophie join us on that journey, and they're taking us in directions that. I suppose I didn't even know existed sometimes, taking us in directions that I can't possibly go with the business. So it's a real pleasure to have them as part of what we're doing and to kind of force us into areas that are important, that not just for us, but for business in general. So and that's enough. That's enough about, I guess, the company and us, but more about these ladies here today.
Perfect. So before we dive in, we want to sort of ground this conversation in the definition of allyship that we love from Karen, who's an accounting manager in financial services. So she quoted that being an ally means taking an active role to do whatever is within your power to ensure individuals are treated equally. So I guess, guys, my question to you guys is, what does that allyship mean to you? And maybe not in theory, but in your everyday behaviours and work.
Allyship, I've never heard that. It's a great term. I think it's important for me, but you may have noticed, you may not have noticed, but I'm not a woman. So it's really easy for me to want to put those things first, but it's difficult or nigh impossible for me to really know what that means sometimes. So I look to the likes of Christina, Amy, and Sophie to actually take the lead in that sense, because I can guess at it, but ultimately then it's just another guy doing something for possibly sometimes can be perceived as the wrong reasons. So when the guys came to me with this idea originally, it was a case of, absolutely, I'm not going to do anything other than what you tell me to do. For me, that's what allyship is about. It's about, allies it's really a partnership. It's about listening to each other. It's a collaboration, and it's about listening to one another and communicating effectively, and then making things truly action based. And that's for me, I suppose, what it means.
And if I can add to that similar sentiment, I think the most important thing is to listen. When I think about how I surround myself with people who are smarter than me, I think of the Steve Jobs quote, why hire people smarter than you and then tell them what to do. So very much as you move into a more of a leadership role, it's about listening. It's about, the 7 habits of highly effective people from Stephen Covey. Seek first to understand rather than be understood. So just get really good at asking questions. And then I think possibly, and we might get into a bit of a discussion about values and that sort of thing. I'm a very firm believer in core values. And one of my personal core values is empowerment. And I've defined that as simply, I believe in you. It doesn't matter who I'm dealing with, whether they're a marginalised group or whether they're women or men, it doesn't matter. It's I believe in you. I want to give you every opportunity to get what you can from your role. And I don't want to be the blocker, don't want to stand in the way. And so that's a personal core value. And then just behind me, by coincidence, behind the desk that I've sat at today, and I didn't choose to sit here for this podcast, are our core values on our boardroom door. And so one of them there is appreciation. And that definition, you probably can't read it, is valuing awesome individuals. And so again, if you have awesome individuals, let's just make sure that we recognise them and celebrate success. We had a couple of celebrations today of some milestones that we achieved. And again, that's about giving a voice to people who might not otherwise speak up. So if we had a major product milestone achieved last week, and we wanted to celebrate that. And so our product manager, Sarah, has done a fantastic job on that. And the tendency or the risk could be to move forward onto the next thing. But what we want to do is stop, pause, celebrate that success. To me, I think allyship is about helping give a voice to people who might not otherwise be heard, no matter who they are, but also having a deep-seated belief in awesome individuals and giving them the opportunity to be awesome.
Yeah, I think that's great. Making sure that everybody has a voice at the table. And I think that for that is what we've actively been trying to do along the way. I've seen the ugly side of it when you don't necessarily have a leader that isn't proactive in his allyship and sort of is, well, for lack of a better term, narcissistic. Coming from a liquidation, you can see the good and the bad, I guess. And part of that teaches you some hard lessons about allyship and why it's important. Do you think, or have you ever experienced when you needed an ally and didn't have it? And I guess, has that sort of shaped how you lead today?
Maybe I'll go first this time. I absolutely, and I guess this helps to define who we are as people. We learn the most from our mistakes or our life experiences, and we can't be taught those things sometimes. So that. And this is a little bit personal to me, and it's something that I've had a bit of help with in my adult years quite recently. And it's a deep-seated thing happened to me when I was in my early teenage years. So I was the subject of bullying. Even now, when I think about it, I think about how awful it was and how destructive it is. And there are, we talk about accountability a bit later on, perhaps. Sometimes that can come across, being firm, that sort of thing. But my personal situation was I was bullied. I mean, I was probably a little bit of a smart aleck, probably deserved it, but nobody deserves to be kind of picked on. And then the very person I was protecting who was being bullied as well, and somebody tried to pick a fight with me and I refused to fight back. Those people befriended that person that I'd protected, and he then tried to pick a fight with me, and it was one of the most awful experiences in my life. And I needed an ally then, and I didn't have one. The person who was my friend, who I supported, they turned him against me. So I've never forgotten that, and it's something that really, I think, defines who you are. And so I guess I'm sharing that because we'll all have experiences deep-seated from our childhood, perhaps, from early work experiences or recent work experiences, and they shape who we are. And so knowing that everybody has that history or some history like that, again, it's just about dialing up your empathy and being conscious of the fact that in a situation, somebody may feel isolated and they may feel that they're not being heard. So give them that voice. Goes back to that, empowerment core value.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with what you said there. Definitely. I mean, I guess we're all a product of our environment, all the way back to childhood. Certainly, I can probably count on one hand, and the number of probably true allies. And by that, I mean you'll have lots of people who may have a shared interest or a shared goal, but they're not there truly for you. And I think in life, I probably only a very small number of people I can count on as true allies. And I think the more that we've gone along on this journey, and then when you lead a company, you probably have even fewer. The allies become sparser as you longer you go and the further you go. But the one or two that you have, those grow deeper and deeper and deeper, and it is literally you would die for those people. And I think I can probably I'm very few people that would count me on their list of those. So I'm a true ally to very few people, and few people are an ally to me, a true ally. And I think the important thing I've learned over the last 50 years is that I think I've only ever needed one person who absolutely, unequivocally believed in me, regardless, good, bad, or otherwise. And in fairness, all over the last 40-something years, all of those one people who believed in me has been a woman. We all owe our existence to a woman, but I owe all of my success to probably two women in my life who have, at all times, without fail, always believed in me and what I can achieve. So I think that's probably what's shaped me, which this is probably why that makes this so important and to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you say that the two allies have been women. How do you call in other men to be allies to you and to other people?
Yeah, I think you have kind of I think you probably, I would describe it as the men that have been allies to me have been closely aligned in terms of for a period of time. But they're like task specific. If it's probably the way to think about it, right? Whereas the two women in my life that have always believed in me have never been about task. It's always been about the enemy, right? Like the soul, if you like. And it's no matter what it is that you're doing, whether you've done right, done wrong, whether you've been successful or failed, they're always there as a true ally regardless, and they're always there to help pick you up, to push you on, to give you that motivation and incentive to keep doing more and being better. Whereas the guys kind of align, for a Sunday afternoon, you score some goals, and then they move on to the next one. I think those few women allies I've had are far more loyal, and those relationships run so much deeper. I think as a result, show the guys are good, and Mark and I are allies right now, and we're supporting one another. We have a common goal, but it's a very different relationship.
I think how you can encourage men to be better allies is my mum's and my grandmother always, your actions speak louder than your words. So demonstrate the right behaviours. And look, we're not going to say that nobody's ever wrong and nobody ever makes a mistake. I mean, there are times where somebody may have made a mistake or somebody may have got something wrong, and it would be unfair to praise them for that if that wasn't true, if we're not being true to ourselves. So this isn't a one-way street, but I think I would agree with you, Daniel, that I think there are many men who perhaps it's a bit woo or it's a bit warm and fuzzy, and it might be a demonstration of weakness. But I think men have a real role to play in calling out the behaviours that are inconsistent with allyship. And I think where that happens, it needs to be, you need to be really strong on that, because often the people who are marginalised don't have a voice in that situation. And I mean, I work in an industry which is, when I started my career in accounting, it was very much a male-dominated environment. And I mean, I was actually listening to a short history of Britain on a podcast yesterday about Margaret Thatcher, and how she became a politician no matter what your views are about her. There were only 3 other women or something in the House of Commons when she was voted in. I mean, that must have just been so difficult. And maybe she became the Iron Lady because of that as a survival tactic. But I would hope that there were some allies there that got alongside her, and she must have had, because she ended up with full support in the end. So I think it cuts both ways. I think we need to call out the poor behaviour. I think we need to be conscious of it ourselves. We need to create an environment where it's okay to speak up. Yeah, we just have to dial up that empathy.
Do you think the expectations are higher when you're a leader to be that ally? Like, from my perspective anyway, I don't think it always has to come from the top down. It can be the bottom up, because not every CEO, not every CTO or CFO is going to have that natural skill set off the back. So do you think that because you guys are, I guess, the leaders in the company, that there's a higher expectation from you?
I don't believe so. I hope not. I really do hope not. I mean, I've been, up until very recently, I've had a female business partner for 11 years, and in the Gap, the leadership team has women on there and men on there. We've had diverse other people in the business as well. I had a business partner in my accounting firm for a very long time, and the only reason she stepped out of that role was for health reasons. So I don't think it changes. I think that there are different personality types and in any leadership group, and I think women often bring a slightly different perspective. Not all the time. I mean, that I would say I would have a reasonably high level of understanding or empathy with other people. I hope people would say that about me. Not everyone would. I'm not going to be everyone's best friend. And then there would also be the business partners that I've had, that not everyone will be their best friend either. And so I think it's about getting the right people in the roles and recognizing your strengths and weaknesses and building a high trust model. I think Patrick Lencioni's got a great book, the 5 dysfunctions of a team, or the advantage more recently. And his first thing he talks about is build trust, and the second one is don't be fearful of conflict. So the dysfunctions are lack of trust or fear of conflict or lack of accountability. Those are the sorts of things that he talks about. And so I think an element of robust discussion is important, and complementary skills around the leadership table, but recognizing different people's styles. So, for example, if somebody is quiet and considered, they might be on a disc profile conscientious. So circulate your agenda for the meeting in advance and give them an opportunity to share their views. It doesn't matter whether they're male or female or any other gender preference. It doesn't matter. You're still giving them an opportunity. And then if you're perhaps a D or an I, maybe dial down your dominance or your influence in the meeting and just recognize that's your personality type. Or if others are doing that and you are similar and you feel comfortable, speak up and ask a question of maybe one of the quieter people in the room. So I think maybe traditionally men have risen into more senior roles. That was when there was a bit more of a segregation of duties. But I'm pretty proud of the fact that I don't see it as much. I do. I mean, I work with hundreds of accounting firms, and I do see it sometimes in some firms. And I don't like it when I see it, and I normally call it out. But I think on the whole, it's changed. I don't know what your thoughts are, Daniel.
Yeah, it's strange because I probably started out my career. When I started out my career, my first accounting role, my boss was a woman. It was my first ever boss in this profession that I started out in, and I was actually in a team of 5, and it was 4 women in the team. I think it was at that time when there was a lot more women coming into the profession. So I think it was the early days where you had a lot of kind of the BPP, the early training stuff, and you had the SEMA qualifications, the NACA qualifications, and they were really being pushed. And there was a period of time about 30 years ago, and they were really going strong. And I think there were a lot more women coming to the profession at that early stage. So it's around the late 90s, I'd say it was, sometime around there. And there's a lot more women coming to work. We come out obviously out the 80s. We had the boom, we had the bust, we had kind of a lot of turmoil and upheaval, and there was a lot more women suddenly going into the workforce back in those early 90s stage. It was the raving time, so we were all going out raving, and so we would come to the work in the office, which was it was a really interesting time. And we had the bubbles that followed that. So it was an incredibly challenging time commercially. There were so many things happening. There was a lot of innovation that was happening. The internet was growing and growing strong. You had so many things that were kind of forming in that early period. And so working as part of a very female dynamic at that point, I suppose it informed a lot of how I think and how I worked. What I was surprised about, I suppose, looking back, I didn't think about it at the time because you just kind of get on with it. But thinking back then, the dynamic then was... It wasn't what you'd expect it to be. In some ways, it was more challenging than being in just a male team. Whereas a lot of time now, you kind of have if you have an all-male team, there's a kind of a lot of unspoken stuff that goes on. There's kind of the boy stuff, the guy stuff that's just kind of unseen, unnoticed. There's all the innuendo stuff and all that kind of. The team just operates differently. As part of a women team, it was very different, and I think what I felt was I never felt isolated. They were always very inclusive in that sense, but they were also hyper competitive, and not so with me. They didn't actually really notice me or care about me in that way. It was quite interesting, but they were hyper competitive with one another. But at the same time, unlike us, we would be hyper competitive. They were hyper competitive, but then the allyship that they had and formed was so much stronger. Looking back at it. So they would be competing with one another and getting one over on each other for 1 minute, but then all supporting one another the next. As soon as somebody dropped, or they dropped the ball, or they made a mistake, people rallied around. Whereas you don't see that so much in the male dynamic as much. It's kind of like you screwed up, and off you go. You kind of almost capitalize on it. Whereas in that, thinking back to those times, so when I did drop the ball when it happened, they also did pick you up and drag you along. So it felt much more cohesive, thinking back. And then with the woman was the boss over all of us, and it was the same kind of thing. They were hyper competitive, not aggressive and such, but very, very, very driven. But they would pick you up and pick you up a bit more often when you needed it, and at times probably when you did need it, rather than when you showed you needed it. They kind of, there's like a sense that when things are happening. So they probably have a better sense of things than we do. I think probably a higher EQ, emotional intelligence too, when we're a little bit down, when we're a little bit up, and how those things need to be addressed. And I think that probably comes maybe a little bit more naturally. And that's just from my personal experience. And you don't notice it at the time. It's only when you look back at all those things, then those early experiences that formed you. It's only when you really look back and you come on a podcast like this and you kind of have to think back to those times. You actually start to realise how things actually were rather than what you thought they were at the time.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective that you were able to experience back then. But if we just move on slightly now, how do you both personally challenge things like tokenism or diversity theatre when you see those sort of things playing out?
Look, I think there's been, I think we talk about, is it performative allyship, where you basically say a whole lot of words, but you don't follow them up with action, and there might be people listening to this and go, well, what do these two blokes know? They this is performative allyship right now, and I think your actions speak louder than your words, and it's really so. The tokenism, call it out if it's there. I also think that we're only going to be defined by our actions. So it might be great to do ESG or B Corp certification, which we've done, and there's a lot of things that we have now locked into our constitution in our company, and there's a lot of policy changes that we made. Those weren't performative. Those were backed up. Those were, if you like, a policy or a codification of what we were already doing. We have a policy about diversity and inclusion. Of course we do, and so we employ people based on their merits, and we try and lean into those policies as much as we can. So I think tokenism is definitely a concern that I have. I also, on the flip side of that, I actually have a bit of a grave concern about, I think we've gone backwards in the last 12 to 18 months in terms of a lot of these things, especially in the ESG, in the environmental space as well. I have real concerns there. So we have ebbs and flows, and I think that if you truly believe in something, it's not just because there's an environmental policy, not just because there's a government policy that supports that, or you're a government and you support that just because you've signed off on a protocol and then you get out of that protocol. So if you're going to do something, commit to it and stick to it. The steps we've done are, we've put it in our constitution. We've got our team to sign off on our team guide and our policy, and we're constantly reviewing that. Tokenism, there isn't a place for tokenism. Equally, at our team meetings, we ask the team members to come up with, what's an example of the core values in practice, share an example of how someone's lived into our core purpose, so that the culture card, if you like, which culture card for me is the core values and their definitions, the core purpose, and the business that you're in and the brand promises that you have. So if you constantly remind people of those, then it can't be tokenism, because people are looking for examples and sharing examples and celebrating those. So tokenism it can't be trendy. It has to be because you believe in it.
Mm.
Yeah, I guess it all comes back to actions, doesn't it? Not words. There's always a danger that your culture either drives your behaviours, or your behaviours start driving your culture. And so that's where the actions become important, because cultures are great, but you do have to hold yourself and each other accountable to them. And there's absolutely nothing wrong. And I think probably one of the challenges that we all face today is that conflict has become something that we feel we should avoid, whereas actually I think conflict is healthy. Because if you don't have conflict, if you have 5 people in a room that all agree on everything, then what's the point of the other 4? I think that's a really important thing for me. So I think conflict is important. It's important to drive actions and change behaviors, because it's very easy to set out on one pathway, but then diverging into something else. Sometimes that's good and sometimes it's bad. I think that the action is, do we feel we're still going in the right direction? Do we feel that our values still represent our behaviors, and our behaviors therefore meeting our culture and our values? And I think that's the most important thing of all, because I think everything is temporary. Nothing is ever permanent. So what we have in place today or tomorrow is not necessarily going to be sufficient next week. What we had in place to get us to where we are today is not going to be enough for the next 12 months. So it's a constantly moving and evaluating culture and values target, I suppose. And the more people that we bring into the business, the more people that we grow, all of those new behaviors and new cultures and new values are going to keep, it's a big melting pot that's going to continually evolve. And actually, I'm quite glad about that, because I'm not one for static anyway. I like change, and I like, not just for the sake of it, but I like constant change. And Christina's smiling there; she knows firsthand how. But and that's really why, and I said at the start, but I think what's important is because to make these things really work, to make it true action. And I said when you guys first pitched this, I said I don't want this to just be a token thing. I didn't say those words, but the words I used were more around, we actually do need this as an exercise to actually truly not just change us, bots for that, and how we behave and who we are, but how much can we go beyond our organization? And I always like big, scary, audacious goals, right? And I said, how can we actually change the direction of how the modern workplace is? Let's think really big. Let's go for as high a possible achievement that we can. And I'm hoping, obviously, all oaks start with an acorn, and that's really where we are. We've got a sprout growing. We've got a nucleus of something that is driving good behavior. Sophie, Amy, and Christina, and keep me contained well in the right way a lot of times. So I think their actions are helping to drive mine as well, and along with the other people in my life. So it is really, for me, it's all about the action, and the action will continually change and drive new behaviors and new values.
We can't talk about allyship without talking about intersectionality, I think. So I think when we're talking about allyship, we have to take into account how multiple identities like race, gender, disability maybe might compound their experience of what inclusion is. So how are you considering these types of intersecting boundaries when supporting individuals or shaping policy?
Well, I think from my perspective, it's that you commit to those policies and then you back them up with your action. So you make it clear that's what you're looking for. You promise to the world through something like a B Corp certification. You promise to the world that that's what you will do, and then you back it up with your actions. I think the other thing that's really important is to identify where somebody might be marginalised, and I mean, I'm going to, maybe this is a little bit off topic, Sophie, and correct me if I have gone on and not answered your question here, but I think if somebody feels marginalised, and we have this conflicting policy of flexible work, right? So somebody feels marginalised and then they choose to work flexibly from home. And then that actually exacerbates the marginalisation just through the fact that they're not in a cohesive environment and at work. The flip side of that is that I might be thinking, okay, well, hold on a second. We've got a whole lot of people working from home. Why don't we change the policy and get them to come into the office? And then through some particular needs that somebody might have at home means for them, and a requirement for them to be flexible, they're then marginalised again. So I guess with any change that you're looking for, it's, I like to refer to the 5 A's of change. So just be aware. So the first A is just be aware. So be aware of diverse groups. Do some reading. I did some reading on this. I have to be honest. I didn't know what allyship meant. I didn't know what performative allyship meant. But when I read it, I thought, right, yeah, okay, that's true. Yeah, there is that does happen. So awareness. Be aware first of what needs to happen. Then accept it. Accept that there are marginalised people, and that you're not going to know who they are necessarily, and you've got to find who they are, and constantly it's changing all the time. Then you've got to take some action. And the only way you're going to take action is if you have some accountability, that you promise to somebody else that you'll do it. So have your leadership team or your, as I talked about, your constitution amended so that there's an accountability mechanism in there. And then acknowledge the last day of change, acknowledge when something goes well. So if you feel that there's been a win, or somebody isn't feeling so marginalised, or your NPS, internal NPS, Net Promoter Score amongst your team has increased a little bit, celebrate that.
I really like that, the 5 A's. I do like that. Daniel, how about you?
I'm also almost tempted to toss this around because the one thing I've accepted over a lot of years of doing what we do is that I never get it right. Period. Never ever get it right. Certainly not first time. Right first time is just a kind of a dream, really. It's a management methodology that sounds great on a corporate slide. The honest truth in anything that we do in any business is that we never get it right. And if we do something 10 times, we'll get it wrong 9, and then we get it right on the 10th. And that's just the blunt reality, I suppose, of what we do. And it's the same in life. We go out into our personal lives, and it's exactly the same. We get things wrong every single day. So for me, I kind of long since worried about the perfection. I just embrace the fact that most of the time I'll get it wrong. And then every now and then, by a stroke of luck or hard work, we'll get something right. And it's the rights that add up. And it's only the right ones that people see from the outside. They don't see all the failures. They don't see all the mistakes. And I very much approach everything we do like that. We keep moving at an incredible pace. I don't think that'll ever slow down. We'll make loads of mistakes. And what I look to is for people to hold me accountable, because it's difficult to kind of hold yourself accountable. It's very easy in some ways because, I got that wrong, right? Yeah. But when someone actually calls you out on it, that's the most effective way to know that, you did actually screw that up. And that's the time that you learn. And it might be a one-off. It might be something that you don't need to change. It might be something you need to make a really wholesale, holistic change across the whole company on. And I'm looking to Christina, Amy, and Sophie and others to actually help formulate what that actually needs to be. So we don't want to avoid tokenism. We want to make sure that we have inclusion, but inclusion is then much broader as well. So it's not just gender and everything else. It's everything. It's what football teams you support, and let's not marginalise people based on that. And just as a silly example, but it is literally trying to include everyone for everything, and that comes with its own set of challenges. Because there are times when we don't want to be included in something. So the inclusivity is a choice as well, to some degree. So for me, it's an incredibly hard balance of trying to get something just right, not too hot, not too cold, just in the middle. And I think we'll always continue to get it wrong. We'll always continue to strive to improve it, just that little bit each time. And I'm literally looking to the ladies to help make sure that we do improve this and do make strides, not to be perfect, not to necessarily achieve a goal, but to just be better. And I think that sometimes we set incredibly high goals within the business and for ourselves, but I think sometimes just being better is an admirable trait to go after, because if we're all trying to just be better rather than aim for perfection, I don't think we're gonna miss the mark.
Really like those answers. Those are great answers.
Let me spin it around for you. So what should, Mark and I are the novices here. You're the masters. We're here to learn from you. You're today's leaders actually. What do we need to do? What do we need to do better?
I think what Mark was saying about the 5 A's is kind of like hits all of that. Just being aware, having accountability, having acceptance for it, those kinds of things. Just understanding that on a day-to-day, I guess, basis, that there are multiple different facets that you can look at in terms of inclusion in allyship. So you're doing the right things and understanding that maybe you might not get it right the first time or the second time, but as long as you keep recognizing that there are things that you could do better and could improve on, I think really just hits that mark.
Yeah, I agree. And I think also the fact we keep coming back to the term of giving everyone a voice. I think that's incredibly important, especially because there are the more reserved characters in the company. I count myself as one. So we don't always find it as easy to be as outspoken with our ideas or general feedback. So yeah, I think also giving opportunities for people to say how they're feeling without any sort of judgment is very important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think it's probably bots that have a lot of big personalities. Mine probably one of the bigger ones in the company, but I think part of that is obviously making space for the more reserved people to know that their opinions are heard, and it's not always my voice or maybe Phil or Aaron's voice that needs to be heard, that it's sometimes lowered the other people in the room that need to be heard, and obviously giving a bit of time for quiet and pause. Like, it is a learning curve. I think it's not just a learning curve for the leaders in this. I think it's a learning curve for everybody, and the education behind that, maybe look at the resource around that and what that looks like from a company perspective, to make sure that we're actively acting towards our core values in terms of inclusion. Inclusion encompasses everything from age up, and we're not going to be able to do that all of the time, because of the needs of the business, because we're so fast moving all the time. But if we stop ourselves and look at our performance reviews and actively check ourselves in those sort of areas to make sure that we are still having that accountability, that, you know, we're going to be taking the right steps in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. And on that note, with inclusion, I guess my question is, how are the both of you, Daniel and Mark, how are you guys preparing for the next generation of, or how are you preparing the next generation of inclusive leaders within your company?
That's an interesting one. It's always a strange one when I kind of stop myself and think about inclusivity and what it means. I think sometimes it's actually more important to be aware of, are you being exclusive? You know, because it's very easy to say we include everyone, but then, you know, sometimes if you don't make it narrow enough, you kind of, in terms of the scope or what you're trying to achieve, you sometimes just don't achieve anything at all. So we've always had, I suppose our purpose is when we're looking at new positions or we're hiring, or it's always, we're never excluding anybody from that other than some of the key factors. Now, by definition, if we say that the role requires the following things, we are always, unfortunately, excluding some groups from that. You know, and that's just, you know, we've got offices where we don't have particularly good mobility access, so we're excluding groups of people from our society in that sense. There are lots of things, unfortunately, that we don't have an awful lot of control over. There are a lot of things that we do, and so we try to always approach it at a point of view. We look at anybody for this role, or we look at anybody for this particular task, and we kind of have to cover that as our basis. So it's not necessarily a deliberate or a politicized kind of approach, but I suppose I've been very fortunate a way in my working life is to have worked in many different places, different countries, different cultures. So it's made me, I suppose, a lot more open to not excluding anyone or any group in particular. But as I said, I know I'll get that wrong from time to time.
I think to think about how you prepare the next generation, it's handing the baton over. It's knowing that we're going to learn as much from the next generation as they potentially can learn from us, and so that's a two-way street. And a nice, you know, I like to think in terms of behaviours or models, and so we have a policy that in the office called ORBED. So OAR, you know, that's above the line behaviour, and BED is below the line behaviour. So we're and in my accounting firm as well, so it's exactly the same. This was a mindset that everybody lived in, and there's no hierarchy in ORBED. So, and it's best to talk about this in terms of when something goes wrong. So when something goes wrong as a child, we're likely to blame somebody else, that's the B, or make an excuse why something happened, that's the E, or deny. So that's childlike behaviour. No, I didn't spread marmalade on the wall. Our natural tendency is to go below the line when something's going wrong. What we've got to do, we'll be thinking potentially self-preservation, below the line. Above the line, O stands for ownership, A stands for accountability, and R stands for responsibility. So Daniel, I'm thinking if you get something wrong on the first time, you'll take ownership of that. You'll say, hey, look, I'm accountable for this. You know, I made a clanger of a mistake a couple of weeks ago. As soon as I found out, message straight to the leadership team, heads up, I've made a mistake. It's a £15,000 mistake, and it's at a time when we can least afford to, it's not like we've got 15,000 rolling around all over the place. And so I take ownership of it, and I take accountability and responsibility. But equally, everybody on the leadership team, because this is a way that we work, also take ownership of that. Right, now we have a problem. Rather than saying, oh, that's Mark's problem, he did that, what are we going to do about it? And how can we work together? So I think recognizing that we can learn as much from the next generation as as they are learning from us, that's the first thing. Constantly be learning, what can we be doing differently? But also have some ground rules about how you work, the orbed, the culture card, the core values, the brand promise, the policies we've talked about, the codification of those policies. That goes through everything, your website, your recruitment, the way you act and behave. And then having some checks and balances in place all the time to make sure it's not tokenism. Doing a net promoter score, doing performance review and goal setting, creating a safe space for people to give feedback. So I like to think of what are the practical things we can do.
Yeah.
Will the AIs include humans?
Well, we have a social responsibility, I guess, to make sure that the AIs that we build are inclusive in their behaviors as well. Accountability, that what we're building is diverse to deal with all of today's problems as well as the futures.
Yeah, absolutely. We know AI, I mean, based off of the way it's trained, sometimes there are, internal biases that haven't really been pointed out or even, I guess, recognized. So that's a responsibility there for sure. Earlier, Mark, you said something about feeling that we've, been progressing backwards a little bit. What advice would you give to up-and-coming leaders to make sure that we keep moving forward rather than, slipping backwards when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah, look, I think it comes back to that, just the whole awareness piece, being aware of this. And then empathy for me is, like you can have sympathy for a marginalized group and that's not going to get you anywhere. Having empathy is about perhaps being able to see things but not necessarily understand it from somebody else's perspective and be prepared to do something about that. So when I say dial up empathy, I mean, well, stop and check, pause, reflect, hold on a second, is anybody being excluded here? And I'm a firm believer in rising tide lifts all ships. So if we can get some marginal gains going with, even through this podcast, people listening to this, hopefully that people will get some takeaways from this and think, all right, well, yeah, I can have that courageous conversation, or I can create a sound bite or have somebody listen to a particular part of this, and then I feel safe to do that. Or I can, Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, call attention to people's mistakes indirectly. So rather than calling them out, just dial up your action or your activity in the D&I space, so people go, oh, okay, oh, maybe I didn't say that particularly well. They'll self-reflect rather than pointing the finger and saying you've done this and you've done that, because then we're just going below the line and blaming other people. So I'm optimistic. I'm disappointed by the shift backwards, and I don't know, Daniel, whether you consider that, or Christine or Amy, Sophie, do you think things have gone backwards a little bit?
The journey isn't one straight line in one direction. It's much like a line chart. It'll go up and down, and the more you drill in, the more up and down and go backwards and forwards you will see. You zoom out and you look at it, a 5 year, it just looks like a straight line going in one direction. But below the surface, and you drill into it, we've gone backwards and forwards multiple times. Sometimes over the same point. And that's unfortunately human behavior, isn't it? That's human nature, is that we are going to constantly get it right, constantly get it wrong. And even when we get it right, we don't necessarily repeat it. The thing for me is it's never going to be, it's a bit like so many other things in life. It's never done. It's never finished. It's just part of our journey. It's part of human history. We will always make things better. We will always make things worse, for sometimes the wrong reasons, sometimes for the right reasons. It's never a straight line. It's never going to be in a continuous way. And I think as long as you keep in mind that there's no such thing as perfection, so I think just not to be too hard on yourself when you do get it wrong. Yeah.
I'm from the US, and I have seen, it feels like it's going backwards as a whole throughout the country. And I think it does, there is some type of disappointment and fear that comes around that. But I think that it's important to not lose hope and to continue leading by example and to continue trying to uphold these values that you have and spread those values to others and support others, so that hopefully sooner rather than later we can catch up to where we should be and go even further, in the right direction, I would say.
Part of it is I think we should just give ourselves a break every so often. That like we're holding ourselves to all of these standards, we're holding ourselves to all of this accountability, and sometimes it's exhausting trying to carry all of the expectations and demands of the world, to be the next leader or to be the person you want to be probably at the end of the day, and that you need to cut yourself a break and say, you are human at the end of the day. We're going to make mistakes here and there, but as long as you own the mistakes and learn from them, then you're still 1% better than you were yesterday. Well, thank you for joining us today on She Means Business, where we turn the spotlight on what active allyship looks like and why it matters now more than ever. But this conversation doesn't end here. We want your voice and we want you to share your opinions. Have you witnessed powerful allyship in the workplace, taken action yourself, or maybe you're still trying to figure it all out? Have your say on our SpeakPipe page and leave us a voice note where we'll play your thoughts and stories and any questions that you have in future allyships. Until next time, keep showing up, keep speaking up and standing up together.